In this video, I'm going to look at an SVG Scalable Vector Graphics pattern that involves octagons and crosses. And that's this sort of goldenrod is the octagon, and then this sort of pale yellow, whitish is the cross. And then there are also uh, these red, which are hexagons, not regular hexagons, but sort of squashed hexagons. Okay, so I'm going to sort of make that unit and then treat it as a pattern and then fill the block, which is of course the easy part. Okay, so I found this pattern was inspired by a pattern I found in this book of ornament published by Taschen. Okay, so basically I'm going to make a bunch of polygons, the octagon, the hexagon, the cross. These are all just polygons, and polygons in SVG are just a sequence of points. And so I want to show you sort of where some of my funny numbers come from. Okay, so here I have an octagon, and uh, we each sort of side of the octagon takes up 360 divided by 8 or 45, but I'm going to go sort of for half of the side. And so that's an angle of 22.5. And I decided to make the side something nice, or in this case, the half side something nice, and I made it 12. So if I needed to divide it by 2 or 3 or 4, it was fairly convenient. And this is going to be a unit, so I wanted it to overall be small, but like a nice number. And the choice of 12 is fairly arbitrary. But then I did a little trigonometry and said, if this were the origin, and I want the y to be 12, what would be the x? And so the uh, x to y ratio is tangent. And if I sort of solve this for the y, I come up with something close to 29. So I'm just going to call it 29. So you're going to see a bunch of 29s floating around. That's where the 29 comes from. And then if I say this horizontal of half the octagon is 29, and there's another 29, and then if this side is 24, I'm going to also make this 24, and then sort of half of that is 12. And so I'm going to expand from sort of half the cross to make my unit. So that was 12 and 24 and 29 and 29 and 24 and 12, and that all came to 130. So you're going to see 130s. I'm going to divide that in half. So you're going to see some 65s. You're going to see 12s and 29s. And so these are the numbers sort of floating around in my points of my polygons. Okay, so let's get started. So there's my reference of the Taschen book on ornament. I made some radial gradients here, a goldenrod, what is this? This is my dark red, and this is my sort of light yellow. And the red is a bigger change, easier to see. But those all have gradients, and they're all radial gradients. So the center is, in each case, I think, brighter than the sides. And because when I'm making my unit, there's an octagon. I think I keep saying hexagon. The octagon in the middle, and then sort of quarter of octagons going around the edges, and all my crosses are sort of, half crosses, or so my unit is a bunch of half crosses. But if I want them to have a gradient, then I've got to sort of define the full on cross and then give it a gradient. Or if I were smarter, I could probably get away with half crosses, but just wasn't that smart. So I made a full on cross, as part of my pattern. The pattern, if a part goes outside, so half those crosses go outside of my pattern, they're just like ignored in the pattern. Okay. So again, 3 in my defs, I have 3 radial gradients with ID, so I can refer to them and use them as fills. Okay. Now I'm making a pattern, and that is going to be the repeating unit. And then in the end, so most of the work is in the pattern. Let's collapse that for a second. Most of the work is in the pattern, and then I just have a big rectangle that uses that pattern as its fill. And in the pattern, I have this user space on use. So that is going to sort of tile it. Okay. All right, so let's dig into this pattern. Before I made the crosses, I just had a fill background of light yellow. So then at that point, if you just want the crosses to be solid, you can do this rectangle thing, and it was light yellow. That all gets sort of overwritten, so I don't need it anymore. But if you were satisfied with the crosses being sort of more of a solid color, then you can eliminate the cross section when we get to it and just keep sort of a background rectangle. Here's my polygon. This is my octagon. This is the octagon in the center. I give it an ID because I'm going to make copies of it to put octagons in the corners of my pattern as well. And so then here is my set of points to make my center octagon. And sort of as promised, it's all those 12s and 29s. It's just sort of basically, all these combinations of 29 and 12. I gave it the radiant. I gave it a black stroke, a black borderline. Okay. And then I skipped to what I call the slanting hexagons. And so here again, you see some 29s and 12s, and then a few other numbers coming in to make these red slanting hexagons. So I made one hexagon and gave it an ID, and then I used that hexagon and did a rotation. So I did a transform attribute with a rotate, and rotate takes degrees, and so I rotated that 90, 180, and 270. And so that got those 4 sort of rotating around my octagon, my slanting hexagons. So I have my basic unit. You can sort of see up here, there's my center hexagon, which we made, and then I made the 4. I think I probably maybe I made this one down here and then rotated it 90, 180, and 270 to make the other ones going around. Then I made my corner octagons. So I took my original center octagon, and I'm doing the use element in SVG. So that's what I'm using, and I'm transforming it. And this I did as a translation. So there is, remember that my overall unit is 130 by 130. So and I did a view box. I don't think I was careful about saying that. My pattern has a view box of -65, 130, 130. So that puts the origin, the 0, 0, the origin of my pattern in the middle of my pattern. And so then when I'm so that made my rotations nice. They were a simple rotation is around the origin, and that's what I wanted, rotation around the origin. And now here I am making copies of my octagon and translating it. And this whole octagon won't, only a quarter of each of these octagons will make it into the pattern once the pattern is cutting it off. Um, but I'm translating to 65, 65 minus 65, 65, all those combinations. And so that put octagons in the corners of my pattern. So here is, just think of this first thing up here as my pattern. There's the center. There are these four translated ones. We can see here, this one up here is only a quarter of the octagon. In each, that's true of each one, but then they pick up the other, another quarter or another, multiple quarters of the octagon from other pattern units, other tiles. And then because I wanted how I wanted to work with gradients, I went and I made a cross. And again, so we see our 29 and 12s, and then we have, we're adding we're adding 24s, we're adding 65s, we're sort of going around and making our cross pattern. And then once I have the cross pattern, again, it is in the corners around the origin, which is in the center of the tile. So I can just take my one cross and rotate it 90, 180, and 270. And then finally, when I'm done my pattern, use that pattern. And because of this user space on use, then it tiles when I'm using it, when the pattern has that property and I'm using it as a fill, then it sort of does a nice simple tiling for me. And that sort of filled it in. So that's it for this one. I didn't use JavaScript this time. I just played with the numbers. I have some, I played with definitions to make various radial gradients. I played with pattern to make a unit that is then tiled. I simplified, did some approximation that I think is like within 1/10%, right? And called this 29 and made a bunch of polygons, octagon and hexagon and the cross patterns, and then played with the transform property to sometimes translate them, sometimes rotate them. All right, that's it for this one. Thanks for your attention.